Hello everybody, and welcome to Wise Ginger. For this episode, we will go over the question of whether or not torture should be allowed. We'll go over the history of torture in the United States, the biblical point of view of torture, and the reasoning and final answer whether or not welcome a special guest here to present your history on torture.
Hello there, and thank you for having me on, Mr. Wise Ginger. Now, I'm a professor, and I'm here to talk to you about torture in the history of the United States. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Early on, in the beginning of the United States, it was really tarring and feathering the main source of torture. Now, this happened for a while, and later on, before the Civil War, it came up. There was many slaves that were tortured while they were enslaved. Many slaves were mistreated, and this came by the way of whipping, flogging, beating, and smoking. After the Civil War, there was much torture when it came to lynching. Now, lynching was because the slaves now had the right to vote. They had the right to do other things that the whites did not want them to do. And the whites often threatened them and tortured them by lynching. These were hanging, burning, beating, many a time, even though these people were innocent. Now, moving on, and early in the 1900s, President Roosevelt in particular started being okay with using torture on the many people he was going to battle with while trying to expand the United States. World War II, you start to see a lot of torture come into play in the Cold War with Russia. Now, there are many different ways that torture is played out. A lot of it is under the books, and it technically was legal. There was nothing illegal about it. There was even a manual that the CIA distributed on how to do it correctly. This is actually a very dark part of our American history. And into the 90s, this continued. But after 9/11, it really spiked. Presidents like Bush and Obama let the CIA torture anybody involved, anyone who may have been involved. This was very controversial on the U.S.'s part. And then later today, President Trump, as of course he does, says that it's okay to waterboard, and he really wants it. And this is also questionable, and many people have their different... What's up, amigos? I'm your youth pastor here to talk about basically torture from a biblical point of view, bro. I want to start in 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians 2 says, "Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God." What this says about torture, even though it doesn't really mention it, is that we can really apply it to this subject in a few different ways. It says, "Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways." If you don't think torture is a shameful act, you need to do some heart searching. It's very secretive and shameful what you do to another human being. This is very deceptive, and it distorts the word of God. People try to use the word of God to support torture. Oh, torture is in it. Doesn't say it's bad. That's distortion. That's taking things out of context. It says, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. Everyone's conscience is in the sight of God. How can your conscience be in the sight of God if you're torturing somebody? That's not what God wants. No, he wants the truth. He wants him. He wants himself. He wants Jesus. You can't do that in the sight of God. Looking from a biblical point of view, you can't torture. Later in verse 6, it says, "For God who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displaying in the face of Christ. Wow, that says so many things about whether or not we should torture or not. Let light shine out of darkness. If it's getting dark, if it's getting scary, there's a terrorist with a bomb and we need to torture somebody, that's darkness. We need the light of Jesus Christ to shine at that moment. What is God's plan? It's not to torture that man. It's not. The light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. Light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory. If God really wants us to have that knowledge, He'll give it to us. He'll make that man confess. We don't have to torture him. Another place where torture is directly referenced in the Bible is in Mark 5, verses 6 through 8. When he saw Jesus come from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus? Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Jesus goes on to encourage the man and meet with him and talk and show him the light of himself. Jesus isn't going to torture him. He shows him love. He drives out the impure spirit in him. He deserved to be tortured. He deserved pain. We all deserve pain. We all deserve hate. But God's light is so kind and just. That's why you cannot torture if you're a Christian. If you have Christian views. The Bible never says that it's okay to torture. Yes, it references it. It never says it's okay.
What is up, everybody? This is your man from the US of A. I'm here to talk to you about why the United States should not allow torture. You know, this is a touchy subject, given that our President Donald Trump says that waterboarding is okay. Now, I have a problem with this. First, torture is just so inhumane, man. It's so inhumane. Shouldn't be allowed to hurt another human being that badly. Torturing is so bad. Another thing is all the problems it has. It's not always accurate. There's so many times that the CIA's tortured the wrong man. That's terrible. Bro, I'm telling you. When you see how the torture in the United States is terrible, it's a terrible history. We don't want to see none of it. Let's change. Let's be the country of freedom and hope that everyone thinks we are, bruh. There's so many things that are wrong with the United States, and one of them is torture. There is a right to remain silent, man. Today, in today's day and age, with the technology that the United States has, we shouldn't even have to. The guy could tell us the wrong thing. The person could be wrong or not know anything. It's so much better with the technology that we have just to use that technology. And if you catch someone, okay, you caught them. Great. Imprison them. You don't need to torture them. Find things out for yourself. Then you're more accurate. You're more confident in your results. You can probably be more effective. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Wise Ginga.